Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of things here. Talking fast because I really want to try to get through this, but let me take a breath and we will continue. We have a few fundamental principles that will apply to any PHRF system. They are not specific to PHRF Lake Ontario. Of course, we have essentially two types of handicapping systems. That would be an observational and a measurement. Though I have been corrected that a VPP program, a velocity prediction program, is different than a measurement system, which if we want to, maybe Owen could elaborate on. It isn't really important, but PHRF anyway is an observational system. It's based on how long a boat takes to sail a certain distance. Generally, this number is seconds per mile. In its basic sense, it's a formula that uses only three variables. It uses the elapsed time, it uses the distance, and the PHRF number or rating. That formula is widely known. You can look it up. Another way to use PHRF is time on time. It does a better job of correcting for diverse rating numbers, and it also is easier on the race committee, which is what I'm looking for. So because we don't have to have an exact distance. Briefly, Owen, can you explain how time on time scoring works?
Time on time, we take our time on distance numbers. So all the numbers you'll see published in PHRF Lake Ontario, like my boat behind me here, is 126 seconds per mile. We take those values, throw them into a formula. So you have that lovely A and B number. You punch in, A divided by B plus your PHRF handicap on time on distance, and that converts it into a time on time multiple. And then you take that multiple and multiply it against your time on the race course to give you a corrected time. And what we're looking at is boats sailing against boats in a given condition, and we're looking at being able to say, this boat with this handicap of 126, this boat with 165, and this boat with 120 took the time they took on the race course, and hopefully the faster boat was going a little quicker than the second fastest, and what I'm saying, time on distance, versus the third one. And we get a result that says, yeah, they're a little closer together because they all maybe sailed pretty well, and that the winner of the race will be the one with the fastest corrected time. So it's just a way to take time on distance, convert it into time on time. The analogy I like using best, time on distance, is like an old school navigation system in your car. It says the distance from Toronto to Rochester is 400 kilometers or 250 miles. I'm going to be doing this, and I'll go to miles at 50 miles an hour. I'll get to Rochester in 5 hours. That's how time on distance works. Time on time, it's like plugging it into Google Maps. You've got all the little bits of traffic going through the border and everything, and that way you actually can absorb all of the real race conditions. That's why we love to use time on time. It reflects really what's going on a race course. And that's it.
That's great. That's great. That's a good explanation. I also want to add that the first PHRF organization to use time on time was PHRF Lake Ontario. And I also want to add that perhaps at the end of this, we will get into some of the controversy regarding the time on time numbers. There are some alternate numbers out there. US PHRF uses different multipliers, and there is quite a group on Lake Ontario who feel we should be moving over to those numbers and all kinds of stuff. And I don't even want to get into Q. So, but if we have time, I know. If we have time, we might get into that if anybody's interested. If you're not, I don't understand it. I'd have to go to Owen and Brian and perhaps Bill to help me out with that. So we're going to move on to some of the other principles of PHRF. The boat itself, of course, is not measured. What measurements are done, usually the sails and so on, are relatively easy, and it can be done by the owner or an individual or the individual handicapper. Another extremely important part of PHRF is that no number is permanent. There is nothing that is written in stone when we give you a PHRF rating number. They are reviewed regularly. And extremely important, as far as I'm looking around the country, as far as other PHRF organizations rather, is that we do not use appeals as a means of alerting to problems within the system. I'm very familiar with an organization down in Florida, and those guys don't do any reviews whatsoever. They say, well, somebody will complain and we'll look at the boat. And PHRF Lake Ontario does not do that. We have a system built in so that these are able to be examined periodically. We're based on the concept of a standard boat. The standard boat is the group of boats which are similar on name and SP number. From that point, we can move to a more refined adjustment, which will give the PHRF rating for an individual boat. I want to go into the actual standard boat, and so I think I'm gonna turn over to Brian the description of the class boat and the modified class boat. Brian, can you explain that to us, please? Whoop, he's muted.
Thank you.
Okay,
There we go.
Muted.
We're good.
over now.
Okay, let's start with the standard boat. The standard boat is the boat that comes from the factory. Okay, that boat has, if you look at the brochure, it has a number of dimensions in it, I, J, E, and P, and those are the boat standards on what that boat's number is going to be based. It also includes if the boat is a standard outboard or standard inboard. So that also affects it, because you're either take your prop out of the water while you're sailing with your outboard, or you're dragging a prop underwater if you have an inboard. It means you keep the stove in, the cushions in, and all the things that are part of a standard boat, and your safety stuff, of course, that is required by the Coast Guard and that kind of thing. So that's the standard boat. And from there, that boat, if it's new, will be compared to other boats and that are of like characteristics, and we'll come up with a rating for it. And it may be the same as a very similar boat, but it may be different because there's design things that will make that boat faster, slower, whatever. When we calculate the ASP, or the adjusted speed potential, that would mean there's something different about that boat than the boat that came out of the factory with 155% Genoas, 180% spinnakers, and 100% main. So if you have a 165 Genoa, then there's a penalty for that, and you will then have that assessed. So if your number was 150, but you have a 165 or 165% Genoa, your number would go down, and you would have a penalty on that. So you and your dock neighbor who has the same boat and only has 155% Genoa will give him a bit of time. The initial assignment we do when we find a boat that comes and we have never had one or don't have one ever to have raced in Lake Ontario. And then we go through that, and a little more complicated in making comparisons, because we have to find out just what things are different compared to other boats. Like a boat may be heavier, but have an almost identical rig to some of the boats we're trying to compare it to. And so we'll have to make some adjustments on that. We also look around to districts that have similar conditions to us. and our neighbors like Erie, Lake Michigan, Detroit, and so on, to find out what kind of number they're giving their boats. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's good. You actually, you moved into some other stuff, but we are tight for time, so maybe we can skip through some early and later things a little
Yeah,
bit
I just
closer.
mentioned a couple of things because I know we're going to be getting to them later, so that
That's
will
fine.
fit,
Well,
hopefully.
we're our time is at a premium here. So, Owen, can you really quickly describe what we would be considering if we had a custom boat, a custom modified boat, and or I don't think Brian quite got onto modified boats a little bit, but what a modified boat would be? Or no, we got Brian up there. Let's, Owen, do what you're doing. Brian, can you describe to us what the
Okay. I'll go back to Q&A.
Oh, Owen, you there? Okay, you do it. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So anytime you start deviating a boat in a critical dimension that changes its performance, we never assume someone takes a boat and says, I want to add a flap to the side of it that acts as a brake. We always assume everything you do to a boat is to make it go faster. So a few years ago, I had someone drag me over to the now defunct Port Hope Yacht Club and said, look at the bottom of this shark. This guy polished the heck out of it, faired it beautifully. And I said, yeah, good job. That's what they're supposed to do. We assume your boat is going to be like that. But if your boat came from the factory with a toilet, a water tank, people love taking out their water tanks because they say we never use them, a rain, stove, whatever, you say, you know what, I'm going to hoist this sail a little further along, add on my boom, or maybe put a small bowsprit on it. Those are all things that start leading you down the road of it being a modified boat. So we'd like you to go talk to your handicapper, we'd like to look at it, and we'd like to see if it actually does something. And if we're starting with a clean sheet, we will use every bit of information available. And what this means is, last year I had the privilege of getting to rate the new Melges IC37. I dug up every VPP and polar available on the internet for that boat and the one the designer said it would look like. I got a handicapper to get me all of the One Design sails, because when you grab their rules, they actually don't describe what they are. I got all the brochures from a bunch of sources. We look at other rating systems. ORC, I've been doing a bit of work on the French system. We've looked at IRC in the past. We look at other areas, because at the end of the day, the laws of physics around the world don't change. If this boat is faster than that boat, there's no way it's the other way around just because you happen to be on Lake Ontario. So we do as much digging as we can, and our primary tool is looking for boats. You know that old saying, if it looks, acts, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. That's kind of how we square in a boat and say, if it's like these other ones, it's probably going to act the same, because you don't change the laws of physics, folks. And that's what we like to look for.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Owen.
You're welcome.
There are two other things, and I'm just going to touch on them because they aren't that common. But that would be a class that is a custom boat, which would be essentially a boat that would be taken from the factory with all kinds of different options on it. You can get one with an inboard, one with an outboard, and so on. That would be considered to be a separate class. And then, of course, somebody can take that boat and, as an owner, modify it, which would be a custom modified boat. So those would be the four types. We have the standard classic standard boat, standard class boat. We have the standard modified boat. We have the custom boat, and then the custom modified boat. So we're gonna breeze through that a little bit. To the extent of time, but if there's any question about this whatsoever, please ask it at the end or at the end of this section. I also want to explain clearly that each one of these boats has a separate name and a separate SP. So each class boat is a separate boat with a separate number that assigns the speed potential to each. Now, Brian kind of got into it a little. Whoop, go ahead.
I do have a question here, and an anonymous attendee wants to know why we're playing around with MGMs of class legal sales. So the question is, what is a class on Lake Ontario? So in the back of the Handicappers Manual in Part 2, we list all of the boats that are one design classes. So if you aren't one of those classes, the word class legal dimension really doesn't mean anything. It's embedded in the SP of your boat, and we use standard dimensions of what 100% mainsail is. So I own an SR Max. I have what I call an SR Max class legal sail. It rates in at 103.1%, and I get a 2-second per mile penalty. Why? Because it isn't 100% sail. And my base rating, or SP, embeds the fact that, hey, the boat as it's been sailed for years on the lake has a sail of this size. So you have to be very careful when you say it's class legal, because if we don't recognize you as a one design class, we recognize you as part of the PHRF class, and 100%, or actually a window between 100 and 102, is the 100% sail. So I hope that answers the anonymous attendee's question.
Very good. Well, we were going to get into that a little later, but that's good. I think we can pass through that. There is an ODR specification, which, to summarize what Owen just said, that will give the standard boat an exception as to what their dimensions are. Again, just to review, the standard boat is considered to have 180% spinnaker, 155% jib, 100% mainsail, capable of hull speed, engine capable of hull speed, two-blade folding prop. It's going to be in top condition, good sails, clean bottom, everything works. That's the standard boat. To simplify the system, we have adjustments made to this standard boat. Basically, they fall into two categories of drive and drag. So if something is on the boat that makes it go faster, in many instances, we can adjust it out, and conversely, slower. I know we've kind of discussed this a little bit, or Brian, you did talk about this, but could you go into some of these adjustments that are made to the boat? Either PHRF Lake Ontario specific or generally a PHRF rating or a PHRF organization?
Yeah, you're speaking of adjustments that come as it was measured?
Well, adjustments that are made as far as having something that is slightly different than the 180% or slightly different than the jib being 155%. Those adjustments that we would calculate.
Okay.
Out in the worksheet.
Yeah, so let's take an example of when we measure your sails, and we'll measure it, and if you come up with say a jib that's 160% rather than 155%, we'll record that in the sorry, I'm jumping ahead to the Handicappers worksheet here a bit too, but on the Handicappers worksheet, that will make an adjustment on the size of your jib, and that's what we'll record. So that would be a minus on that on your rating. If you have a carbon fiber mast, you will get, if it comes standard on the boat, all's good. But if you put that on, that you'll receive a minus on that, and in that particular case, it's -6 for your boat. If you have an outboard that you can't pull up, then there's an adjustment for that, so that you're getting +6 for dragging the bottom of your outboard along. So is that enough of an example?
That's what I'm looking for. We're going to be going into the handicap.
Yeah, I don't want to get too detailed on all this because we're going to look at it later. I know.
That's perfect. So after all of those adjustments are made, we get an ASP, which is And I'm not sure which it's officially either assigned or adjusted speed potential. So essentially, that's a speed or a rating which is given to an individual boat, which has been adjusted for the size of the jib, size of the spinnaker, size of the main, type of prop, and so on. We also, and what would be resulting would be the ASP and essentially a non-conforming boat. If in fact your boat sails with no spinnaker, it is considered to be a non-conforming boat. Owen touched on the one design, which we don't have to continue with or pursue any further. And I think that pretty well covers the basics of PERF. The SP assigned to an individual class, the ASP, which is our adjustments that are made to an individual boat.